Okay, we're picking up with the Tapestry in chapter 2. A constantly repeated pattern. We'll read the first half. Right. Ever since the direct creation of Adam and Eve, a woman has been essential in the mystery of being. Without a woman, there would be no next generation. Although the Bible's genealogies name the succession of men, it does not leave out the importance of the women. Women are not relegated to second-class status by the fact of their bodies providing, quote, homes for both men and women during their lives. Women and men need this place of protection for the first 9 months, no matter where life takes them later. It is the first home of kings and peasants alike. The book of Ruth ends with a genealogy, a careful list of fathers and sons. It is a genealogy of David and therefore a part of the genealogy of Christ. I find a wonder of balance in its placement at the end of a book about 2 women, Naomi and Ruth. Listen to the crescendo of the story, which is like a beautiful song. Quote, "So Boaz took Ruth and she became his wife, and the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, 'Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth.'" Ruth 4:13-15. What a gorgeous gift, the gift of birth, placed within the realm of women's possibilities. Think of it. Bach's mother gave him the gift of birth. Luther's mother gave him the gift of birth. Michelangelo's mother gave him the gift of birth. Beethoven's mother gave him the gift of birth. Pharaoh's mother gave him the gift of birth. The prisoner of Chillon's mother gave him the gift of birth. Robert Fulton's mother gave him the gift of birth. Without the conscious choice to make this often costly gift of birth, which today so many mothers' choices have turned into the gift of death, the gifts individual people have brought into the stream of history could not have been given. Scientists, inventors, artists, musicians, explorers, those who have handed down the flag of the true truth generation after generation, the gift of birth was essential to each of them. Let us turn again to the tapestry. Focusing in with our magnifying glass, we can trace the threads needed to bring to life another woman who gave the gift of birth, Bessie Williamson, Fran's mother. In 1816, just 9 years after Robert Fulton had invented the steamboat in America, and just 12 years after the first steam locomotive had been made in Great Britain, Fran's great-grandfather, William Joyce, was born in Nottingham, England. Britain had been plunged into the Industrial Revolution in the late 1700s as a result of Watt's invention of the steam engine in the 1760s. Each of us, I'm sure, has thrilled over the exciting picture of a little boy watching the steam come pouring forth from his mother's kettle. Imagine that bright little mind suddenly recognizing the power that had never been harnessed, captured, used, as he watched that so very common sight, the kettle coming to a boil for the pot of tea he would soon be sharing. But little Watts was not dreaming thoughts of tea with milk put into the cup first, and a dash of sugar to satisfy his hunger. Rather, he was imagining the potentialities of steam. What a change was the result in the lives of individuals because of this tea time, quote, birth of invention. And what change was to take place not only in travel, but in trade between nations because of the steamships and the steam locomotives. Roads were so bad, so bumpy and full of holes and ruts, that in William Joyce's growing years, the means of travel was limited to horse-drawn wagons and pack horses. Stagecoach travel came later when his Scotsmen began to make improvements on roads. How welcome the steam locomotives must have been in spite of the smoke and cinders. But when William Joyce chose to travel, for some reason he set off to sail the ocean to America, rather than to travel by land to continue his trade as a weaver in his native country. He came to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to Germantown in 1846. The town consisted then of little more than the main street, Germantown Avenue, and all its roads were of the most primitive sort. Newspaper articles at the time of great-grandfather Joyce's 94th, 95th, and 96th birthdays tell us that he first worked in America in those same Germantown mills. Later, he became a shoemaker and still later a postman. Amazingly, for many years, he walked 25 miles a day, delivering mail, yet on his, quote, day off, enjoyed long walks. The paper says he was known to many as Uncle Billy and always gave strong opinions on politics and the conditions of the world. His granddaughter, Fran's mother, frequently used to tell of his walks on Sunday afternoons in the woods of the Wissahickon, still a wooded park area, where he would bring home truffles he had gathered, which they would cook and eat with scrambled eggs, tea, and homemade bread as a Sunday evening treat. He knew mushrooms well enough to gather edible ones for other times of treat. Amazing though it may seem, truffles did grow in the moist darkness of the leaf-covered soil of the Wissahickon woods. Great-grandfather Joyce married early in his time in America and had 2 little girls, one of whom, Mary, was to be Fran's grandmother. His wife died when she was 35, and little is known about her. William Joyce must have cared for his girls until Mary married, and after that he lived with this married daughter until his death at 96. Fran and I have a fascinating old document, the Naturalization Papers of William Joyce. With lettering as flowery as its language, this document makes it known that on the 3rd day of October, 1848, William Joyce declared it was his, quote, bona fide intention to become a citizen of the United States, to renounce forever all allegiance and fidelity to every foreign prince, potentate, state, and sovereignty whatsoever, and particularly to the Queen of Great Britain and Ireland, of whom he was before a subject. It's kind of hard to believe, isn't it?
Yep.
That you have to renounce that.
Yes, it's incredible.
Or they did, at least. Fantastic to think of it. Here he was renouncing allegiance to Queen Victoria and happily trudging the streets, or dirt roads rather, delivering mail in Germantown. I think it's important here for us to get a feel of what was being woven in other portions of the tapestry of that time of history. In the mid-1800s, Reginald Hebert's hymn, Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, early in the morning our song shall rise to thee, was being set to the music of John B. Dykes, and being sung in church after church one day to be familiar to me and to you wherever we first heard it. Not too many years after that, in the village of Champery, Switzerland, Frances Havergal was walking along paths, resting and writing some of her hymns, and nearby the last prisoner was not yet out of Castle Chalon, while, quote, Uncle Billy, or great-grandfather Joyce, was so proudly declaring that he was, quote, attached to the principles of the Constitution of the United States and well disposed to the good order and happiness of the same, and having declared on his solemn oath before the said court that he would support the Constitution of the United States, end quote. In his native England, probably in London, 2 men were engaged in writing something that would change much of future history and the lives of myriad individuals. The men were Karl Marx and his friend Engels. The year was 1848, and the book was the Communist Party Manifesto. The date on Uncle Billy's document was 1848, the same year. What small glimpses we get of the preparation of the ground for the planting of evil seeds, leading to despair, and the preparation of ground for the planting of the seeds of truth and true hope. What had any of these people living in William Joyce's day to do with him? Yet how astonished he could have been if someone had handed him a paper to be written 100 years later to read to the influence Marx and Engels had had upon young Americans through many years. And how surprised he would have been to know that the great-grandson, placed in his arms as a baby during each visit of his granddaughter, was to cross the same ocean with his family just 100 years after his own signing of his solemn pledges. It was in 1948 the Schaeffer's ship was to be plowing across the Atlantic, and before too long they would be walking the same Champery paths as Frances Havergal and singing her hymns and their own family times of worship. But I am getting ahead of my story. Great-grandfather Joyce's daughter Mary had married Wallace Williamson in 1877. One of their 2 daughters was Bessie Williamson, who was one day to meet and marry Frank Schaeffer and become the mother of Francis August Schaeffer, the 4th to have the same name. Mary was 25 when she married 26-year-old Wallace, and 10 years later she was left a widow with 4 children and her retired father to take care of. There seemed no other way to supplement their tiny income than to take in washing. So it was that Fran's mother, who had her diploma from Germantown Grammar School in 1897, at the age of 17, had found life such a grind of hard work. Getting up before light to help her mother start the washing, helping with the ironing after school, and doing studies by gaslight at night, she became bitter about hardships and blamed having children for some of her own unhappy existence. Her resolve that she would never be a slave to bringing up children must have been fiercely made during those days. In understanding Bessie Schaeffer, it's necessary to remember that her father died when she was 8, and from then on her home seemed more a laundry than a home. Other people's dirty clothing had to be hand-rubbed on boards, with the homemade soap rubbed on dirty spots and knuckles getting raw from the washboard ribs. Bacon fat drippings and any other fats or grease from whatever sources they could gather. It had to be kept in jars until there was enough for the soap making, mixing it with lye and cooking it up in a pot. Long years after the mother Schaeffer continued making her own soap to rub the spots and shaving it with a knife into flakes, more coarse than ivory flakes, but in that general form. I can still remember the odor of that homemade soap being melted in hot water and stirred on the stove as she prepared it for, quote, Monday wash days. Familiar, too, in a homey part of wash day was the odor of laundry starch mixed with cold water and then stirred as it came to a boil. A bowl of thicker starch being set aside for cuffs and collars of men's shirts, and a thinner batch to dip the tablecloths, napkins, dresses, and aprons in. Although Bessie had finished enough education to teach in a primary school, it seemed she continued to help her mother cook, clean house, market, make clothing, and do the mending for the household of 6 people. Even after sisters and brothers left home, she was the one who remained to help. Her life included church attendance in the Evangelical Free Church and in Christian Endeavor Society, with its big choir practices leading to concerts. For Bessie, who loved to sing, these practices were favorite times. In later life, she told of hay rides, sleigh rides, and various outings of young people in the Wissahickon. So her life wasn't all work, but something through it all gave her a bitterness that colored her personality with an unsympathetic selfishness and a resolve that was a forerunner of the right's emphasis of today's drives to protect oneself. Take care of number 1, nobody else will, was the saying she would repeat with a tight-lipped anger. Or was it hurt more than anger? In spite of the Lutheran church exposure Frank Schaeffer had in his childhood and the regular church attendance on the part of Bessie Williamson, the knowledge of the riches of the Word of God and its marvelous truth, which would have given a different base for life and an understanding of not only life eternal, but the moment-by-moment help the Lord can give now, was lacking to these two. They met, became engaged, waited primly until there were material things enough to furnish a house, to set a table with everyday dishes and a sprigged rosebush English china set for Sundays. In months of industrious preparation for marriage, Bessie had made a, quote, hope chest full of tablecloths, runners, and doilies, to put on every available surface, heavily embroidered and trimmed with handmade crochet and tatting, along with sheets and pillowcases also properly embroidered and hemmed, dish towels, tea cloths, and the inevitable pile of linen guest towels. They never knew of any other kind of preparation, spiritually or in any area of human relationships. Questions concerning the purpose of life didn't seem to be verbalized, if indeed they floated about in their minds. They were going to marry and establish a new home. That home would be, for both of them, as much as they could make it, without the poverty that had spoiled their own childhoods in different forms. Frank's idea of being a good husband was to earn enough money for food, clothing, and all the daily expenses. He began immediately to bring home his paycheck, hand the bulk of it over to his wife, to apportion in proper balance for their needs, and to put in the bank properly when she could save enough of it. In a small amount, he put in a tin box on a special shelf in the cellar, his own spending money. Bessie's idea of being a good wife was to have the house always spotlessly clean and tidy. Monday was wash day, with her homemade soap prepared ahead of time, her clothesline properly rubbed with a clean, wet old face cloth before hanging out the wash and her tubs out and ready to be filled by 4 a.m. Frank felt that a good husband should fill the tubs for his wife and, quote, work the hand-powered washing machine, running 2 loads through before leaving for work. Tuesday, ironing day. The kitchen table of good oak wood was fixed with blanket padding and topped with sheets to make a wide ironing board. Here, piles of clean shirts, dresses, hand towels, tablecloths, and sheets came into a crisp and beautifully ironed state, drying on a rack, the old English method, before being folded and put away. Wednesday was mending day. Any buttons that were off, any hems coming out, any socks with holes waited in the basket where they had been gathered. Bessie would sit in the kitchen rocking chair and mend, then turn to other sewing after her morning's everyday work was done. Thursday was the marketing day. Off to Germantown Avenue, or the Main Street, as she always called it, would go Bessie with her market basket over her arm. It was so exactly like the child's game and song. Here we go round the mulberry bush, with each day having its special job. Friday, cleaning day, meant tying up one's hair in a kerchief and dusting walls and woodwork, windowsills and baseboards, as well as polishing all the furniture and brushing the rugs. Later, with the Bissell sweeper, electric vacuum cleaners not having come into existence. Windows had their regular weeks to be washed, and as for a spring and fall house cleaning, that meant taking everything out of its place and airing mattresses as well as pillows and blankets out in the garden. It was an amazing ritual. Every rug had to be thrown over a line outdoors to be beaten with the wicker rug beater. There was church to attend and the ladies' societies in order to do the proper good works for the church, rolling rolls of bandages and folding single ones and making nightgowns or aprons or children's clothes to send to needy countries through the Red Cross or church missionary societies. There was 4th of July with fireworks to set off while neighbors were setting off theirs, and other holidays with their parades to attend. On hot nights, there was the treat of getting ice cream in a pail at the corner store and eating it outside where the air was moving a bit, or the watermelon to put on a cake of ice in the icebox until it was cool enough to split and cut into huge wedges. It was into this kind of a home that a baby was to be born. Bessie had resolved she would never have more than one because, quote, I'm not going to be a slave to children. And she never did. There hadn't been any natural childbirth classes or any explanation of what was going on, but, quote, it's time to call the doctor, was positive enough a statement to send Frank Schaeffer on the run out into the night. He found the doctor all right, and they came back in his buggy, but the hindrance to the night's proceedings was that the doctor was rip-roaringly drunk. He was quite in control of the situation, and that he had tied a sheet to the footpost of the bed, told Bessie to pull on the sheet with all her might and main, and push. It must have been just the right moment of transition, and she must have had an easy time, because she always told me in retrospect to that night, quote, it was easy. I just pulled on the sheet and pushed, and the baby was there on the bed. The doctor automatically did all the right things about tying off the cord and getting the baby washed, but as he left, his fuzzy brain and overwhelming sleepiness wiped all remembrance out of his mind the next morning of his need to register that birth at the proper office. So, years and years later, when Fran went to get his passport to make the 1947 trip for a survey the mission board was sending him to do, he found he had no birth certificate. Fortunately, his mother was still alive and could swear in front of a notary to the fact that her son had been born on January 30th, 1912, and that his name was Francis August Schaeffer. And that's all I'm going to read tonight.
That is fantastic. I love hearing that.
Yeah.
It's amazing thinking about that Marx was writing his thing at the same time.
His grandfather.
Yeah, and that Gabe mentioned Das Kapital
Today
in the sermon.
I know.
Just incredible.
Mm-hmm.
What a tapestry.